What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy and welcome back to another Crimson Invasion deck profile, and this time we are taking a look at Regibox, or Regis.deck, whatever you want to call this thing. This is actually the same deck we featured in our recent testing rounds video, so if you actually want to see how this deck looks in action, I'll be sure to have a link to that as well. And also, if you guys are new to the channel and aren't familiar with our testing rounds videos that we post, they're normally kind of like our rough, unrefined starting points to start testing with, so there might be some things in this list we can change or improve, something just to keep in mind as we go through this deck profile. But anyway, so we have Regibox that features all of the new Regis from Crimson Invasion, and they all kind of have this gimmick where they work together, and you get additional effects if each of them are in play. So that's kind of what the deck's going to be based around, and we have some other attackers as well to kind of make this like a six corners anti-metagame style deck. That's what we're kind of going for here. So first up, we have 3 copies of Registeel. This is going to be the main Regi in the deck. So it's 130 hit point, metal type basic, and we're mainly looking at for its first attack for a single metal energy does 30, and you attach a metal from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. So this is going to be kind of how we power up some of our attackers, and the typing on this guy is actually really important because you do hit things like Ralts and Alolan Vulpix for weakness. So with a single metal energy, you can actually just knock those guys out in one hit, which is great in this metagame since those guys, at the time of filming, are still pretty popular. But yeah, like I said, it also helps power up the rest of our Pokemon. And Registeel has another attack for 2 metal energy and a colorless. It is 90, but if you have Regice on your bench, you heal 30 damage from Registeel. So you can kind of see that's the type of stuff they're going for. Whenever you have these other Regis in play, you do more damage. Or not necessarily more damage, but you gain additional effects, I should say. Yeah, so that's going to be Registeel. He's kind of like the main Regi of the deck, but we are playing 2 copies of Regirock. So his ability is if he's in play, your Registeels do 10 more damage. Definitely a good thing since Registeel is kind of the main Regi that we're going to use for probably the first half of the game. But then Regirock also has an attack for 2 fighting and a colorless is 110, and the damage is not affected by resistance. So with Registeel, we hit things like Ninetales and Gardevoir for weakness. With Regirock, we hit things like Drampa GX and Zoroark GX for weakness. So that's kind of what this guy is going to be used for. Next, we have 2 copies of Regice. Regice has this ability, if you have Regirock in play, Regice can't be hit by your opponent's stage 2 Pokemon. So that's definitely a very, very strong ability in this type of format, since at the time of filming, there's plenty of stage 2s running around. You have Gardevoir, you have Metagross, you have Vikavolt. So there's a bunch of that type of stuff going on in the game right now, which bodes well for Regice. Then it's attack for a water and 2 colorless to 70 damage. So this is going to be mainly for like our Volcanion matchups and our water weak Pokemon. If you have a choice band on this guy, you hit for 200 against water weak Pokemon. So assuming they don't have something like a Fighting Fury Belt, preventing them from being knocked out in one hit, Regice is going to be able to clean up against your fire decks. Next up, we have 1 copy of Regigigas. So Regigigas is going to be kind of like a late game sweeper potentially. Has an absolutely monstrous 180 hit points. I couldn't believe that when I first saw this card. Just as much as the old Regigigas EX. So this guy is a tank. But he definitely has some downsides to him. His ability, he can only attack if the other Regis are in play. So that's not really what you want to see. But, you know, it's kind of easy to get all 3 of them in play. One Bridget searches out everything you need, basically. But anyways, he's mainly used just for 1 attack or 2 at some point in the late game. So his attack for an absolutely insane 5 energy, you're doing 160. So with the choice band, you do 190. That knocks out basically every non-evolution like EX and GX in the game. So pretty good. Especially, you can also use Registeel at some point in the early game to soften up Pokemon for Regigigas to clean up with as well. And I forget if I mentioned, you also discard a Stadium with the attack as well. So throughout the game, you'll probably have a Regigigas sitting on your bench, and he'll be one of your targets for your Registeels to power up. And you might be thinking as well, like, you know, how are you going to power up all these different attackers? They all have weird energy costs. We'll get to that later. We have a new energy that came out of Crimson Invasion that we're going to show off in this deck as well. That's going to be it for all of the Regis, but we still have some other cool inclusions. We have 1 copy of Cobalion from Steam Siege. So it has this quick guard attack, prevent damage done to it by basics on your next turn, so that is definitely good against a number of decks in the format. And then also Revenge Blast for 2 metal, does 30 plus 30 more for each prize card your opponent has taken. So definitely another good late game sweeper. You know, if someone picks off our Regigigas before it gets set up, which to be honest is probably likely to happen since it does take forever to power up. You have a much more efficient late game attacker. You know, its damage output is a little bit more conditional as opposed to Regigigas, but sometimes it can be a much quicker late game sweeper to power up. So we're also playing one copy of the Stardust Jirachi. So discard a special energy card attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. If you do, Jirachi is immune from all effects of attacks, including damage on your opponent's next turn. So if you go through all these attackers, they all have answers to certain decks in the format, but one deck in particular that this deck I think will struggle against is going to be Golisopod. You never really knock them out in one hit, and when you do, they just Acerola up their Pokemon. So I'm playing Jirachi right now as a way to have an answer against that. You know, we have an answer against Guardy, Ninetales, Volcanion, Drampa. So I felt like it's important to also have an out against Golisopod, especially the Garbodor variant. One Stardust Jirachi can actually potentially win you the whole game, since most of their deck is special energy. Also, at the time of filming, Drampa Garb is playing a much heavier count of special energy than other decks as well. So that's another out against that deck. Guardy plays special energy. Just so many decks play special energy, but this is mainly for the Golisopod matchup. And the last Pokemon we're playing is one copy of Mew for that Memories of Dawn ability. Lets us copy any of the attacks on our basic Pokemon, which is all that we run. We still need the right amount of energy to use the attacks, but that's not too big of a deal. So Mew is good to hit against things like Garbodor, Espeon, GX, basically anything that is weak to Psychic. So, like I said, it's kind of like an anti-metagame type of deck. You have answers to all these different types of decks, and that's kind of what we're going for. And next up, we have 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX just to round out the list, just to get supporters out of our deck. So going on to our supporters, we have 4 copies of Sycamore, 4 copies of N, you know, pretty standard inclusions, but we are also playing 1 copy of Lily as an alternate form of draw. So you draw until you have 6 cards in your hand, or if it's the first turn of the game, you draw until you have 8. So one thing that is very precious in this deck is bench space, actually. So I don't want to be completely reliant on Lele for every time we want to play a draw supporter. So that's why I opted for another copy, or like another draw supporter in the deck, just to hopefully make sure we don't have to bench a Lele at certain times in the game. Maybe with this copy of Lily in here, we can just use this instead of having to use Lele to grab a Sycamore or something else. Since, like I said, bench space, very, very precious in this deck. So next up we have 3 copies of Guzma, pretty standard inclusions, just to choose what we want to take knockouts on. All of the Regis also have like kind of a weird retreat cost, so Guzma helps us get around that. 1 copy of Bridget, so just to search your deck for 3 basics, put them on your bench. So that's really nice. If we start with a Registeel, for example, we can actually just bridge it for the rest of the Regis all in one go and get set up that way. And the last supporter we're playing is 1 copy of Ninja Boy. So like I mentioned, bench space is very, very precious in this deck, and there might be some times when you have to bench an extra Lele or 2 or something like that, and your bench might be a little clogged. You can always just Ninja Boy out of a Lele into something else if need be. But there's also other situations where Ninja Boy can come in handy. For example, if your opponent goes down to a low amount of prizes, you can Ninja Boy into Cobalion and use Revenge Blast to take like your last knockout or something like that. So there's definitely a deck Ninja Boy might fit into. I could see it being this one. So we're trying that out right now to see how it does. So next up we have 4 copies of Ultra Ball just to search our deck for any Pokemon. 4 copies of Max Elixir as well, just to speed up the deck a little bit. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck. You get attach a basic energy you find there to one of your benched basic Pokemon. So just to give us a little bit more speed, and makes attacking with things like Regigigas a little bit more manageable. Next up we have 4 copies of Choice Band just to do more damage to your opponent's EXs and GXs. You know, why not play the 4? We have the space when building the deck. I like being able to hit for 60 with a Registeel. That's really nice. 60 for 1 and accelerating energy. Just very, very good. Also, if you put it on a Regigigas, that means you're going to do 190. You know, similarly with Regice, you'll do 100 or 200 since you'll be using this against fire decks. So it's just very, very important to hit for the numbers that we need to. Also, Revenge Blast as well is very important to have Choice Band for. So that's why we are playing that. Playing 3 copies of Floatstone, just because a lot of the Pokemon in this deck have a really awkward retreat costs, and a lot of times, a lot of these Pokemon will just be bench sitters. So in the case of Regirock and Regice, sometimes you want them in play just for their abilities, and they don't really do much. So you'll need Floatstone to ensure they don't get stuck in the active spot. But then we're also playing 1 Switch. So we're playing the 1 copy of Switch instead of a 4th Floatstone, just because we want Choice Band on our Pokemon, ideally. So sometimes you might have a Registeel in the active spot, but a Floatstone in hand, and you might not want that. So we're trying out the 1 copy of Switch instead of the 4th Floatstone, just to give us that extra bit of mobility. I might even consider dropping a 2nd Floatstone for another Switch, but right now the 1 seems okay. So next up we have 1 copy of Field Blower to discard our opponent's tool cards and stadiums. So Field Blower, honestly not as important in this deck as against others, since we're not too ability reliant. A lot of times you don't really need the Pokemon for their abilities, so you don't need to constantly get rid of Floatstones on your opponent's Garbodors. There's not really many stadium cards that really hurt us. Parallel City is the only one I can really think of, and so we can use that against maybe Gardevoir decks that play Parallel City, but generally speaking, Parallel is not too popular. Gardevoir, at the time of filming, is the only deck that plays it, and they typically only play 1 count of it. So next up, we are playing 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, just to get Pokemon from our discard pile back into our deck or hand. We're playing this over Super Rod, just because, well, normally I would play Super Rod in Max Elixir based decks, but Registeel accelerates energy out of the discard, so I prefer having the option of getting a Pokemon back into our hand. And then 1 copy of Special Charge to get back Special Energy, which I'm about to show off. So this is going to be one of the new big cards from Crimson Invasion that really helps this deck work. It's going to be 4 copies of Counter Energy. It's kind of like the old Scramble Energy from way back in the day. You can only, well, you can play it even if you're not losing, but the main effect of the card kicks in if you're behind on prizes. So it provides a colorless energy, but if you are behind in prizes, it provides 2 energy of any kind. So that means we can, excuse me, just throw one of these down on a Regirock or a Regice to fulfill their attack costs. Similarly, in the late game, if you're down on prizes, you can bench Cobalion, attach 1 single counter energy, and start taking knockouts with that. Also, on Regigigas helps power it up a little bit quicker as well. So definitely helps make this deck work a little bit better, because a lot of times you might not even take the first knockout. A lot of times you're going to take the first several turns just using Registeel to power up some attackers and start getting your board set up. And then the last of the deck we're playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 copies of Metal Energy. Just enough to where we can hit them with Max Elixirs once in a while, and also draw into them to discard. That way we can accelerate them with Registeel's first attack. But yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for this deck. Definitely kind of a fun one. I'll have to test it more to see if it's actually going to be super competitive or not, but I really like the fact that it is kind of like an anti-metagame deck. We don't really have a very good anti-meta deck right now as the time of filming. And I think the last really fun one I really enjoyed was probably the old 6 Corners deck back from the Noble Victories format. So if you are a fan of something like that back in the day, definitely try this out. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. But definitely a fun deck if nothing else. But yeah, guys, what do you think about this? Is there anything in this deck you would change? Do you like the concept of it? Let us know below in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. But yeah, guys, that's going to be pretty much it for this one. Definitely stay tuned. We're going to have a ton more Crimson Invasion coverage coming, so definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, as usual, feel free to like and subscribe, and a big shout out to all of our supporters over on patreon.com/rarecandytcg. If you want to support our channel, definitely check us out over there, or pick up something from our online store at rarecandytcg.com. It'd be greatly appreciated. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you for the next one.